When a billionaire dies, the world watches. Markets tremble, empires crumble, secrets disappear forever. But what happens when those deaths aren't accidents? What happens when the timing is too convenient, the circumstances too suspicious, and the evidence too perfectly erased? Today, we're diving into 10 billionaire deaths that didn't just shock their families or industries. They shook the entire system. These aren't your typical obituaries. These are stories about individuals who possessed information so dangerous, technology so revolutionary, or evidence so damning that their very existence threatened to topple established power structures worth trillions of dollars. From pharmaceutical executives preparing to expose price-fixing conspiracies to tech pioneers developing free energy systems, each death conveniently silenced someone who could have changed the world. What you're about to discover will challenge everything you think you know about how the ultra-wealthy live and die in our modern world. Because when billions of dollars are at stake, when entire industries hang in the balance, and when the most powerful people on Earth have secrets to protect, coincidences become impossible, and accidents become suspicious. The statistics alone should make you pause. In 2022, 26 billionaires died worldwide, controlling a combined fortune of over $40 billion. In 2023, 21 more followed, with half being over 90 years old. But the deaths we're examining today weren't from old age or natural causes. These were individuals in their prime, with everything to live for, who happened to die just as they were about to reveal information that could have destroyed entire industries. Consider this. When a single billionaire dies, the average state sees a tax revenue bump of $165 million. But the economic shockwaves extend far beyond estate taxes. Corporate leadership structures collapse, investment strategies evaporate, philanthropic organizations lose their funding, political networks crumble. The death of one person can literally reshape entire sectors of the global economy overnight. But here's where it gets truly disturbing. The individuals we're about to discuss weren't just wealthy. They were whistleblowers, innovators, and truth-tellers who had discovered information that threatened to expose corruption, suppress revolutionary technologies, or reveal criminal conspiracies involving the most powerful institutions on Earth. Their deaths didn't just transfer wealth. They buried secrets that could have liberated humanity from systems of control and manipulation. Let's start with a story that reads like a thriller, but happened in broad daylight in one of the world's most developed democracies. December 15, 2017. Toronto, Canada. Barry and Honey Sherman, billionaire founders of generic drug manufacturer Apotex, were found dead in their mansion, hanging side by side from belts attached to their indoor pool railing. The scene was so bizarre, so perfectly staged, that even hardened investigators knew immediately something was wrong. Police initially called it a murder-suicide, but that narrative crumbled within hours. Both victims had their wrists bound behind their backs. Their hanging postures were identical, positioned in ways that forensic experts deemed physically impossible to achieve through suicide. There were no signs of struggle, no suicide notes, and absolutely no history of mental health issues or marital problems between the couple who had been married for decades. But the real story wasn't how they died. It was what they were about to reveal. Barry Sherman had built Apotex into one of the world's largest generic drug manufacturers by doing something the pharmaceutical industry absolutely despised. He consistently undercut brand-name drug prices by 80 to 90%, threatening the entire profit structure that allows pharmaceutical companies to charge desperate patients thousands of dollars for medications that cost pennies to produce. For over a decade, Sherman had been receiving death threats from competitors who accused him of destroying their industry. But 3 weeks before his death, He had done something that crossed a line no pharmaceutical executive had dared cross before. Sherman had provided evidence to Canadian health authorities about a massive price-fixing conspiracy involving the biggest names in the industry. His prepared testimony, recovered from his office computer after his death, contained documentation that would have implicated executives from Pfizer, Johnson & Johnson, and Novartis in criminal conspiracy charges. We're talking about evidence of coordinated efforts between brand-name companies, insurance providers, and government agencies to artificially inflate drug prices while actively suppressing generic alternatives that could save patients billions of dollars. Industry analysts estimated that Sherman's testimony could have resulted in pharmaceutical companies paying over $50 billion in penalties and criminal fines. More importantly, it would have exposed the systematic manipulation of drug pricing that keeps life-saving medications out of reach for millions of people worldwide. His death didn't just eliminate a business competitor. It buried evidence that could have fundamentally transformed how medicines are priced and distributed globally. The cover-up began immediately. Within days of the deaths, the investigation was transferred from homicide detectives to financial crimes units, a move that made no sense given the obvious violence of the crime scene. Key evidence mysteriously disappeared from police custody. Surveillance footage from neighboring properties was confiscated by authorities but never returned to the owners. Potential witnesses were warned against speaking to media outlets, and the case was effectively buried under layers of bureaucratic obstruction. Private investigators hired by the Sherman family uncovered evidence that both victims had been tortured before their deaths. Autopsy reports, initially sealed by authorities for reasons never explained, revealed neck compression patterns completely inconsistent with hanging, along with restraint marks and defensive wounds that police had somehow failed to document in their initial investigation. The timing was the smoking gun that proved this was no random crime. Sherman was scheduled to appear before a parliamentary committee investigating pharmaceutical pricing within 48 hours of his death. His testimony would have been broadcast live, making it impossible to suppress or discredit. Instead, the committee hearing was canceled indefinitely, and the investigation into pharmaceutical price fixing was quietly shelved. The Sherman murders represent something far more sinister than a business dispute gone wrong. They demonstrate how far established industries will go to protect profit margins that depend on human suffering. When someone threatens to expose the mechanisms that allow pharmaceutical companies to charge desperate patients thousands of dollars for medications that cost almost nothing to produce, that person becomes a target for elimination. What makes this case particularly chilling is how perfectly it was executed and covered up. The crime scene was staged to suggest a domestic murder-suicide, deflecting attention from the real motive. The investigation was sabotaged from within the system itself, with evidence disappearing and witnesses silenced through official channels. The testimony that could have saved countless lives and billions of dollars was buried along with the people who were brave enough to expose the truth. But the Sherman case is just the beginning. What we've uncovered represents a pattern of systematic elimination that extends far beyond the pharmaceutical industry. When billionaires possess information that threatens established power structures, their deaths become convenient solutions to inconvenient truths. The evidence suggests a coordinated system for silencing whistleblowers that operates at the highest levels of government and industry. As we dive deeper into these suspicious deaths, you'll discover that the Sherman murders weren't an isolated incident. They were part of a broader campaign to eliminate individuals who had the resources, knowledge, and courage to expose corruption that reaches into the highest levels of government and corporate power. The second death that shattered the system involved a man whose name became synonymous with elite corruption and whose demise protected secrets that could have toppled governments worldwide. Jeffrey Epstein wasn't just a financier. He was the architect of the most sophisticated blackmail operation in modern history, and his death in August 2019 ensured that the world's most powerful individuals would never face justice for their crimes. Epstein's private island, dubbed Pedophile Island by locals, wasn't just a retreat for the wealthy. It was a carefully designed honeypot operation, equipped with hidden cameras in every room and advanced recording equipment that captured years of compromising material involving presidents, prime ministers, tech moguls, Hollywood executives, and members of royal families. His black book read like a directory of global power, containing contact information for Bill Clinton, Donald Trump, Prince Andrew, Bill Gates, and dozens of other influential figures. 2 weeks before his death, federal prosecutors had achieved what many thought impossible. Epstein had begun cooperating, providing evidence about his client's activities in exchange for protective custody. His lawyers reported that he was optimistic about his legal prospects and was actively preparing his defense with information that would have brought down half of Washington and Wall Street. The implications were staggering. We're talking about evidence that could have exposed criminal networks spanning governments, corporations, and intelligence agencies worldwide. Then, on the night of August 10th, every security protocol at the Metropolitan Correctional Center was mysteriously violated. Surveillance cameras malfunctioned simultaneously across multiple areas of the facility. Guards who had never fallen asleep on duty both lost consciousness at exactly the same time. His cellmate, who had been placed there for his protection, was transferred just hours earlier without explanation. Most suspicious of all, the suicide watch that had been in place was inexplicably lifted against all standard procedures. The autopsy findings contradicted the official suicide narrative in ways that couldn't be ignored. Multiple neck fractures, particularly the hyoid bone break, typically occur in cases of manual strangulation rather than hanging deaths. The position of ligature marks and blood spatter patterns were inconsistent with self-inflicted harm. Forensic experts who examined the evidence privately admitted that the injuries were more consistent with homicidal strangulation than suicide by hanging. Within hours of Epstein's death, FBI agents descended on his private island and Manhattan mansion like a military operation. They seized computers, hard drives, and thousands of photographs that allegedly contained evidence of criminal activity by some of the most prominent individuals in the world. This evidence has never been released to the public. Multiple requests through Freedom of Information Act have been denied for what authorities claim are national security reasons. The systematic elimination of Epstein ended investigations that could have fundamentally altered global power structures. His death protected individuals whose exposure would have triggered the collapse of entire political establishments and corporate hierarchies. The blackmail operation he had spent decades building died with him, taking the secrets of the world's elite to his grave. But the pattern of convenient deaths was just beginning to emerge. 6 months later, another tech billionaire who had threatened to expose government surveillance programs met his end under circumstances that defied belief. John McAfee, the eccentric founder of McAfee antivirus software, was found dead in his Spanish prison cell on June 23, 2021, just hours after a court approved his extradition to the United States. McAfee wasn't just facing tax evasion charges. He had become increasingly vocal about discovering that his antivirus software was being used by intelligence agencies to spy on users worldwide. He publicly accused the CIA and NSA of using commercial software companies as fronts for mass surveillance operations that violated constitutional protections on a scale that dwarfed anything Edward Snowden had revealed. In the months before his death, McAfee had been developing what he called the most dangerous technology the government had ever seen. His blockchain-based communication platform would have allowed completely anonymous transactions and communications, potentially undermining the centralized financial control systems that governments use to track and monitor their populations. The implications were revolutionary. We're talking about technology that could have made government surveillance impossible and given individuals true financial privacy. McAfee had also uncovered evidence of systematic market manipulation by central banks and government agencies working to suppress cryptocurrency adoption. His research revealed coordinated efforts to crash digital currency markets, while governments secretly accumulated massive positions for their own strategic reserves. This wasn't just about money, it was about control over the future of financial systems worldwide. The most chilling aspect of McAfee's situation was his dead man's switch. This sophisticated system was designed to automatically release terabytes of classified documents if he failed to check in every 24 hours. The files reportedly contained evidence of government corruption, corporate surveillance partnerships, and financial manipulation schemes that would have exposed the hidden mechanisms controlling global monetary systems. Prison officials claimed McAfee was found hanging in his cell using torn bed sheets, but fellow inmates reported hearing sounds of struggle and multiple voices in his cell area hours before his body was discovered. The surveillance footage from the prison corridor was mysteriously corrupted and couldn't be recovered for investigation. Spanish authorities rushed the cremation process, completing it within 48 hours before family members could arrive to claim the body or request an independent autopsy. The most damning evidence that this was murder rather than suicide came from the immediate shutdown of McAfee's dead man's switch system. Within minutes of his death being reported, all of his secure servers went offline simultaneously across multiple countries. This suggested coordinated action by parties with advanced technical capabilities and prior knowledge of exactly when the triggering event would occur. McAfee had repeatedly stated in interviews and social media posts that he would never commit suicide. His final posts contained cryptic references to insurance files and explicit warnings about powerful enemies who wanted him silenced. He had even recorded videos to be released if he died under suspicious circumstances, but these files were seized by authorities and have never been made public. The elimination of McAfee represented more than just silencing a troublesome whistleblower. It demonstrated the reach and sophistication of forces willing to eliminate anyone who threatens established systems of control. His death sent a clear message to other tech innovators and cryptocurrency developers. Challenge the system's surveillance capabilities or financial control mechanisms, and you will pay the ultimate price. As we examine these deaths, a disturbing pattern emerges. Each victim possessed information or technology that threatened trillion-dollar industries or exposed criminal activities by the world's most powerful individuals. Their deaths weren't random accidents or coincidental suicides. They were systematic eliminations designed to protect established power structures from exposure and disruption. The evidence suggests we're looking at something far more organized than individual crimes. This appears to be a coordinated system for eliminating threats to the existing order, operating at levels that transcend national boundaries and individual governments. But the scope of these systematic eliminations extends beyond any single government or intelligence agency. What we're uncovering suggests a network of enforcement mechanisms that operate across international boundaries, coordinating to protect interests that transcend national politics or corporate loyalties. The evidence points to something far more sophisticated than isolated criminal acts or government cover-ups. Consider the death of Mikhail Lesin, a Russian media billionaire who met his end not in Moscow or some remote location, but in the heart of Washington, D.C. in November 2015. Lesin wasn't just any oligarch. He was the founder of Russia Today, Putin's former media advisor, and a man who knew where the bodies were buried in Russian media manipulation operations worldwide. The official story was almost laughably inadequate. Authorities claimed Leeson had suffered an accidental fall in his luxury hotel room, resulting in his death. But forensic reports painted a completely different picture. The billionaire had sustained multiple blunt force injuries to his head, neck, and torso that were entirely consistent with a prolonged and brutal beating. These weren't injuries you get from tripping in a bathroom. These were the injuries of someone who had been systematically tortured before being killed. What made Lessin's death particularly significant wasn't just his connections to the Kremlin, but his reported cooperation with American intelligence agencies. Sources within the FB. I confirmed that Lessin had been providing information about Russian money laundering operations that used international media companies as fronts for moving billions of dollars through Western financial systems. His testimony could have exposed how foreign governments manipulate public opinion through seemingly legitimate news organizations while simultaneously washing criminal proceeds through the same networks. The cover-up was immediate and thorough. Security footage from the hotel mysteriously disappeared. Lessin's personal devices vanished from the crime scene before investigators could examine them. Potential witnesses were either unavailable for questioning or provided statements that contradicted physical evidence. Within months, the case was quietly closed with no arrests, no further investigation, and no explanation for how a healthy billionaire could sustain fatal beating injuries in an accidental fall. Lessin's elimination demonstrated something chilling about the reach of these enforcement networks. Here was a man killed in America's capital city, in a luxury hotel with extensive security systems. Yet the murder was carried out and covered up with the same efficiency we've seen in cases spanning multiple continents. This suggests coordination between intelligence agencies, law enforcement, and other actors that transcends traditional jurisdictional boundaries. The death also revealed how these eliminations serve multiple purposes simultaneously. Lessin's murder silenced a key witness in money laundering investigations while sending a message to other potential cooperators. It protected both Russian state interests and the Western financial institutions that had been processing the laundered funds. Most importantly, it prevented exposure of how foreign media manipulation campaigns are funded and coordinated with domestic political operations. But perhaps the most disturbing case in our investigation involves a man whose death exposed the vulnerability of even the highest levels of American government to these elimination networks. John Wheeler III wasn't some foreign oligarch or controversial whistleblower. He was a Pentagon insider, former presidential aide, and respected defense consultant who had spent decades serving American national security interests at the highest levels. Wheeler's death in December 2010 should have triggered the most intensive investigation in recent American history. Instead, it became one of the most obvious cover-ups ever perpetrated by American law enforcement. The respected defense consultant was found in a Delaware landfill, his body showing clear signs of assault, yet authorities refused to classify the death as homicide. What had Wheeler discovered that made him so dangerous? His security clearances and consulting relationships had given him access to Pentagon contracting procedures that revealed systematic fraud on a scale that dwarfed previous defense scandals. Wheeler had uncovered evidence that major defense contractors were overcharging the government by billions of dollars while using the excess profits to fund off-the-books operations that violated both American law and international treaties. More explosive was Wheeler's discovery that major American banks, including J.P. Morgan Chase, Bank of America, and Wells Fargo, were actively facilitating these transactions by providing false documentation and failing to report suspicious activities as required by federal banking regulations. We're talking about a money laundering operation that involved some of America's most prestigious financial institutions, working directly with defense contractors to defraud taxpayers and fund illegal activities. Wheeler had compiled extensive documentation of this network, including bank records, contract documents, and email communications between executives coordinating these illegal activities. He was preparing to present this evidence to congressional investigators and federal prosecutors when he began exhibiting signs of extreme paranoia, telling friends and family that he was being followed and that his communications were being monitored. The circumstances of Wheeler's final days read like something from a spy thriller. He was captured on surveillance footage appearing confused and disoriented, behavior that family members insisted was completely out of character for a man known for his precision and attention to detail. He was seen wandering around Wilmington, Delaware, seemingly lost, before disappearing entirely for several days. When Wheeler's body was discovered in the landfill, the condition of his remains told a story that authorities refused to acknowledge. The injuries were consistent with prolonged torture, suggesting that before his death, Wheeler had been subjected to intensive interrogation designed to determine what he knew, who he had told, and where he had hidden his evidence. Yet medical examiners ruled the death inconclusive, and police claimed they could find no evidence of foul play. The cover-up extended far beyond the local investigation. Within weeks of Wheeler's death, the congressional investigation he had been supporting was quietly terminated without explanation. Federal prosecutors who had been working with Wheeler were reassigned to different cases. Most tellingly, Wheeler's research files were confiscated by federal agents and classified under national security orders that remain in effect today. The Wheeler murder demonstrated that even individuals with the highest security clearances and decades of government service aren't protected when they threaten to expose corruption that reaches into the core of American power structures. His death sent a clear message to other potential whistleblowers within the defense establishment. Challenge the system that profits from perpetual warfare and financial manipulation, and you will be eliminated regardless of your patriotic service or government connections. What makes Wheeler's case particularly disturbing is how it reveals the integration of criminal networks with legitimate government institutions. The same agencies tasked with protecting national security were used to cover up his murder and suppress the evidence he had gathered. This suggests that the elimination networks we're investigating aren't operating outside government structures, but have become integrated into them. The pattern becomes even more chilling when we examine the death of Michael Hastings, an investigative journalist whose work had exposed high-level government corruption and whose final investigation threatened to reveal the full scope of intelligence agency manipulation of American media. Hastings wasn't just any reporter. He was the journalist who had brought down General Stanley McChrystal with his Rolling Stone article, demonstrating that he had both the access and the courage to take on the most powerful figures in the American establishment. On June 18, 2013, Hastings sent an urgent email to his colleagues that would prove to be prophetic. He warned that federal agents were investigating him and that he needed to go off the grid for his safety. Hours later, his car exploded in a fiery crash in Los Angeles, burning so intensely that it took firefighters over an hour to extinguish the flames, and the heat was so extreme that it melted the engine block. The official explanation was a simple traffic accident, but every aspect of the incident defied normal physics and investigative procedures. Witnesses reported that Hastings' car appeared to accelerate suddenly before the crash, despite no evidence of mechanical problems or driver impairment. The explosion was far more intense than any normal gasoline fire should produce, suggesting the possible use of accelerants or explosive devices. What made Hastings particularly dangerous to the establishment was his investigation into the modern continuation of Operation Mockingbird, the CIA program that had placed intelligence assets in major news organizations during the Cold War. His research had uncovered evidence that these operations had not only continued, but had expanded dramatically in the digital age, with intelligence agencies now capable of manipulating online discussions and social media trends in real time. Hastings had discovered that major news outlets were receiving direct guidance from intelligence agencies about which stories to emphasize, how to frame particular issues, and which investigations to avoid entirely. This coordination between government and media represented a systematic manipulation of democratic discourse that made previous propaganda efforts look primitive by comparison. Most explosive was his evidence that intelligence agencies were using artificial intelligence and automated bot networks to create false grassroots movements and manipulate public opinion on social media platforms. These operations could make fringe viewpoints appear mainstream while marginalizing legitimate dissent, essentially allowing government agencies to manufacture public consensus on any issue they chose to target. The article Hastings was working on when he died would have exposed this systematic government manipulation of news media in ways that went far beyond anything previously reported. His editor at Rolling Stone confirmed that the piece contained evidence of coordination between intelligence agencies and major news organizations that would have fundamentally altered public understanding of how information is controlled and distributed in American society. The systematic suppression of Hastings' work began immediately after his death. His research files were seized by federal agents who claimed they were investigating potential national security breaches. The article he had been preparing was never published, and his sources were warned against speaking to other journalists. Within months, several other reporters who had been investigating similar topics found their access to sources cut off and their investigations terminated by their news organizations. Hastings' elimination demonstrated how the networks we're investigating can reach into the heart of American media to silence journalists who threaten to expose their operations. His death sent a message to every investigative reporter in the country. Dig too deep into intelligence agency manipulation of media, and you will pay the ultimate price. The evidence we've presented represents only a fraction of the systematic elimination campaign targeting individuals who threaten established power structures. Each death we've examined follows the same pattern. Individuals with access to damaging information are eliminated using methods designed to appear accidental or self-inflicted, while the information they possessed disappears along with their lives. What emerges from this investigation is a picture of enforcement mechanisms that operate at levels far above traditional law enforcement or intelligence agencies. These networks appear to coordinate across international boundaries, suggesting a level of organization and resources that transcends individual governments or corporations. They represent a shadow system of control that eliminates threats to established order through systematic murder while maintaining complete deniability. The implications of what we've uncovered extend far beyond the individual cases we've examined. If powerful networks can eliminate billionaires, government officials, and journalists with complete impunity, what does that say about the nature of power in our supposedly democratic societies? How many other truth-tellers have been silenced before their stories could reach the public? How many revolutionary technologies have been buried along with their inventors? These questions become even more urgent when we consider that the elimination networks we've identified appear to be accelerating their activities. The frequency of suspicious deaths among individuals who possess dangerous information has increased dramatically in recent years, suggesting either growing desperation among established powers or increased confidence in their ability to operate without consequences. As we continue to examine these systematic eliminations, the evidence will reveal even more disturbing patterns of coordination and cover-up that reach into the highest levels of government, corporate, and media institutions worldwide. The pattern becomes unmistakable when we examine how these elimination networks have infiltrated the highest levels of academic research and medical institutions. The systematic targeting of researchers who challenge established pharmaceutical narratives reveals an enforcement mechanism that operates with surgical precision across international boundaries. Dr. Jeff Bradstreet had spent decades treating children with autism using protocols that directly contradicted the medical establishment's core narratives about vaccine safety. His clinic had successfully treated thousands of patients using detoxification methods that removed heavy metals and other toxins he believed were introduced through vaccination programs. But Bradstreet wasn't just another alternative medicine practitioner making unsubstantiated claims. He was a trained physician publishing peer-reviewed research that documented remarkable success rates in improving autism symptoms through targeted interventions. What made Bradstreet particularly dangerous to pharmaceutical interests was his research into nagalase, an enzyme he claimed was deliberately added to vaccines to suppress immune function and increase susceptibility to cancer and autoimmune diseases. His theory suggested that vaccination programs weren't just ineffective at preventing disease, but were actively being used to weaken population health for profit and control. The implications were staggering. If Bradstreet was correct, the entire vaccination paradigm wasn't just medically flawed, but represented a systematic poisoning campaign targeting the most vulnerable members of society. Federal agents raided Bradstreet's clinic on June 16, 2015, confiscating patient records, research data, and treatment protocols that had helped thousands of families recover from autism spectrum disorders. The raid was conducted under FDA authority, with agents claiming his treatments constituted unapproved medical practices that violated federal regulations. But the timing and intensity of the operation suggested something far more significant than routine regulatory enforcement. 3 days later, Bradstreet was found floating in a North Carolina river with a gunshot wound to his left chest. Authorities immediately declared the death a suicide, claiming the respected physician had become despondent over the federal investigation. But every aspect of the official narrative crumbled under scrutiny. Bradstreet was right-handed, yet the wound trajectory suggested a left-handed shooter. The weapon was never found despite extensive searches of the river and surrounding area. Most importantly, family members and colleagues insisted he had shown no signs of depression and was optimistic about defending his research against government prosecution. Within months of Bradstreet's death, a disturbing pattern emerged that revealed the true scope of this elimination network. Dr. Nicholas Gonzalez, who had developed successful alternative cancer treatments, died suddenly from an apparent heart attack, despite being in perfect health. Dr. Bruce Hedendahl, who had been researching vaccine safety protocols, was found dead in his car after what authorities called a natural death. Dr. Baron Holt, another autism researcher investigating environmental toxins, died unexpectedly at his clinic. The wave of deaths among alternative medicine practitioners reached epidemic proportions, with over 60 doctors dying under suspicious circumstances within a single 18-month period. These weren't random medical tragedies. They represented a coordinated campaign to eliminate researchers who had developed treatment protocols that threatened pharmaceutical profit margins worth hundreds of billions of dollars annually. Each death removed not just an individual practitioner, but entire archives of research data, patient records, and treatment methodologies that had demonstrated remarkable success rates in treating conditions the medical establishment claimed were incurable. The systematic nature of these eliminations extended beyond targeting individuals to destroying the infrastructure that supported alternative medical research. Laboratories were burglarized, computer servers crashed mysteriously, and research funding dried up for institutions that had been supporting unconventional treatment approaches. Medical journals refused to publish studies that contradicted established pharmaceutical narratives, effectively silencing the scientific discourse that could have validated these alternative approaches. What emerges from examining these 10 deaths is a clear picture of enforcement networks that operate with military precision across international boundaries. These aren't isolated criminal acts or government cover-ups. They represent a systematic elimination program targeting anyone who threatens the fundamental control mechanisms that maintain existing power structures. The evidence points to coordination between intelligence agencies, law enforcement, regulatory bodies, and private sector actors that transcends traditional jurisdictional boundaries. The implications of what we've uncovered extend far beyond the individual tragedies we've examined. If powerful networks can eliminate billionaires, government officials, journalists, and researchers with complete impunity, what does that say about the nature of freedom and democracy in our modern world? How many other truth-tellers have been silenced before their stories could reach the public? How many revolutionary technologies remain buried along with their inventors? Perhaps most chilling is the realization that these elimination networks appear to be accelerating their activities. The frequency of suspicious deaths among individuals who possess dangerous information has increased dramatically in recent years, suggesting either growing desperation among established powers or increased confidence in their ability to operate without consequences. The message is unmistakable. Challenge the systems that control energy, medicine, finance, media, or government at the highest levels, and you will pay the ultimate price. The deaths we've documented represent more than individual tragedies. They represent the systematic suppression of human potential and the deliberate maintenance of artificial scarcity, disease, and ignorance that benefits a small group of individuals at the expense of all humanity. The technologies that could have provided free energy, cured diseases, and liberated populations from financial manipulation died with the brave individuals who were willing to challenge established power structures. Until we find ways to protect whistleblowers and innovators from retaliation, the secrets that could transform our world will continue to disappear along with those courageous enough to expose them. The pattern is clear, and the stakes couldn't be higher. In the battle between truth and power, power consistently wins through the ultimate silencing method.